Okay, so we're diving deep today into populism, something a lot of you are hearing about
hmm
and maybe wondering what it all really means.
Yeah, it's a big topic, and we're going to try to unpack it using this article by Deepak Joshi.
He really digs into how populism plays out, and he uses Nepal as like a case study.
Right, which is helpful because it gives you a concrete example to see these dynamics in action.
Definitely. So to start us off, what's Joshi's take on how to actually define populism?
Well, he basically lays it out as this ideology that sets up this big division in
Still
society
between.
between the common people and like a corrupt elite. The idea that politics should just reflect the will of the people.
Hmm. So it's kind of like setting up this us versus them, right?
Exactly. And that's a powerful idea. It taps into this feeling that ordinary folks are being held back by this like self-serving group at the top.
That makes sense. So what are some of the things that Joshi says are fueling this kind of thinking?
He points to a bunch of factors. And while he's using Nepal as his example, a lot of this stuff probably resonates with what you're seeing in other places too.
Like what kinds of things specifically?
Well, he talks about how people at the grassroots level feel like they're being ignored by the system, both economically and politically.
Like their concerns aren't being addressed.
Right. And in Nepal specifically, he highlights stuff like, huge income inequality, lack of jobs, poverty, unstable governments, even anxieties about culture and identity.
Yeah, all those things can definitely create a climate where people are looking for something different.
Absolutely. And Joshi puts a lot of emphasis on the loss of trust in traditional political parties.
He says that in Nepal, decades of leadership haven't really improved the lives of everyday people.
Yeah, declining incomes, worsening law and order corruption, all that stuff erodes people's trust.
It makes sense if you feel like the system isn't working for you, you're going to be more open to something new, even if it's like a radical change.
Exactly. That promise of a fresh start can be super persuasive.
So what are some of the hallmarks of populism that Joshi talks about?
Well, one thing he points out is that it tends to appeal directly to ordinary people by like promising them exactly what they want.
Like playing to their desires.
Yeah, he even mentions how so many Nepalese have to go work abroad.
Oh, wow.
And that really speaks to this yearning for better opportunities at home, right?
Yeah. I bet that resonates with a lot of folks in different ways.
Yeah.
Wanting things to be better where they are.
For sure. And another thing is the way populist leaders communicate. It's often very straightforward, very emotional.
And they tend to blame the whole existing political system.
Yeah, like the whole thing's broken and they're the only ones who can fix it.
We often see these really charismatic leaders emerge, right?
Absolutely, promising huge changes. But Joshi says when you look closer, there's often not a lot of substance there.
Oh, so like a lot of flash, but not a lot of concrete plans.
He even compares it to like a big bubble, you
Wow.
know? It looks impressive, but it could burst at any moment.
That's interesting and kind of worrying, right? Like what happens when these folks actually get into power?
Well, that's a big concern. Joshi says they can end up creating what he calls an illiberal system.
What does that mean?
Basically, it's a system that weakens democratic norms and institutions.
So even if it looks like a democracy on a surface,
Right underneath, it's something else entirely.
it's something to think about.
Yeah.
And he also talks about this thing called emotional political marketing.
PE.
Yeah. What's that all about?
It's basically how populist leaders use communication to get voters really riled up.
Like appealing to their emotion.
Exactly, making you feel like time's running out and you got to choose between this bad past and this hopeful future they're offering.
So it's not really about reasoned debate or anything like that.
Not so much. It's more about tapping into those gut feelings, hope, anger, fear.
I can see how that would be effective.
Yeah.
So does Joshi see any downsides to populism?
Oh, yeah, he's got some serious concerns.
Yeah, what
Well, for one thing, he argues that it doesn't actually provide solutions to the complex problems we face.
it just kind of papers over them with promises?
Right, and he's worried that it can cause some serious damage to democratic values, even if it doesn't stay in power for that long.
Hmm. He mentions those big promises made in Nepal, like, becoming the next Singapore or Switzerland.
Yeah, but then progress is super slow and people get disillusioned.
I guess that gap between the rhetoric and the reality can be pretty jarring.
Totally. And Joshi points to the misleading slogans and the disconnect between the rulers and the ruled in Nepal as examples.
So there's this widening gap between the people in power and everyday folks.
And he blames politicians for not doing a better job of representing the people and being a bridge between the government and the people.
Okay, so it's not all sunshine and roses with populism, to say the least. But Joshi does acknowledge that it can be framed positively sometimes, right?
Yeah, like he mentions how some people see it as giving a voice to the voiceless or bringing attention to issues that have been ignored.
But he always comes back to those core issues of trust and the need for a savior figure.
Exactly. He sees those as like the hallmarks of populism.
And then there's this whole thing about populist leaders claiming to be neither left nor right.
Yes, that's a classic move. Yeah.
What's the strategy there?
Well, it allows them to position themselves outside the existing political landscape. They're not part of the establishment. There's something new and different.
So to sum it all up for our listeners, Joshi's article really paints a picture of populism as this complex phenomenon.
It feeds off of division and it thrives in places where there are a lot of societal problems and a lack of faith in the traditional way of doing things.
It often promises easy solutions and relies heavily on emotional appeals.
But as Joshi points out, it can also pose some real risks to democracy.
So that leaves us with a big question for all of you to think about.
In a world that's full of complex issues and where simple solutions can seem really tempting,
What are the things that help you tell the difference between real progress and effective leadership?
and the often alluring but maybe empty promises of populism.
It's something worth considering as we navigate these, increasingly complicated times.
Absolutely. It's on all of us to be informed and engaged.
So thanks for joining us for this deep dive into populism.
We hope it's given you some food for thought.
And we'll see you next time.
Until then, take care.
Bye.